And I will pass the host duties over to you, Jason. If you need anything, then please pass it back.
I can do that. All right, my biggest challenge will be not to screw anything up here. Well, thanks for being here. Give me just a second to share screen. There we go. All right, I hope everybody can see that. All right. If I don't hear any complaints, I'll just assume it's okay. And as I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see the chat box. So somebody, if they have a question or something important pops up in the chat box, please interrupt me and say so. Otherwise, we'll just get moving here. So thanks for being here. What a crazy 2019 it was. And at least 2020 is starting out perfectly normal, right? Gosh, what a year. So let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this. This is kind of interesting, these Zoom meetings. Most people, when they do these, they save their thank yous to the end. I'm going to get my thank yous in right up front, just so you guys don't fall asleep, so get those first. This has been a crazy, 2019 was a crazy year for us. It was our first year growing industrial hemp. And to be honest with you, until the day that plants arrived, we weren't sure if we were going to get any plants or not. So none of the work that we did would have been possible without the folks you see on the screen now. Krager Enterprises got us some plugs to get started with. Sunstrand sent us some fiber seed. Schiavi Seed sent us seed as well. Colorado Hemp Genetics gave us cuttings, plants, and even loaned us equipment for processing and trimming. The Department of Ag has been an incredible partner in all of this. USDA NIFA is, we're part of a multi-state industrial hemp working group, and with support of the USDA multi-state group, I'm able to travel and meet once a year with colleagues around the country that are doing the same thing. So it's been great. And research at K-State Research and Extension, administration has been incredibly supportive of us the last year, and they're really happy with what we've done. So I want to get those thanks in up front. I hope I haven't forgot anybody. I know nobody needs to like a new Facebook page, but I will let you know that we do have a K-State Research and Extension Industrial Hemp Facebook page. We put some corny videos up there and try to share our information. It's always a good place to keep up with what's going on here. There are no secrets with our there's no secrets with our work here. A lot of research. You hold your data back. You hold your data back until you've got everything that's publishable, and then you go forward with one publication. We have to submit annual reports to the Kansas Department of Ag. So we have done that. Our reports are available. They're online. You can go to New Prairie Press, the web link you see there, and you can download our reports and get our data right just as we presented it to KDA. So yes, what a crazy year, all brought on because of this darn CBD oil. It just, in my 18 years, nothing has generated as many phone calls, emails, drop-ins, people visiting, asking questions as industrial hemp has. And of course, the big excitement up front was CBD oil. And the people that would come in to visit, there were everything from experienced farmers looking to maybe do something a little bit new to people who literally have never grown a crop before, but they see these outrageous dollar numbers that are being advertised, and they just got to get in on it. So it was crazy, the level of expertise that would come into the door. But it's not just about CBD. There are other products. This is hemp oil, not to be confused with CBD oil. You can go to your grocery store and buy hemp oil, where which comes from the seed, from the grain. It's harvested and it's pressed just like soybeans would be pressed for oil, or canola would be pressed for oil. So you can actually press it. It's a really high oil content seed. You can press it and get the oil out of it, and it tastes. You use it kind of like olive oil. It's not recommended to cook with. Apparently, it has a really low smoke point. So unless you want all your fire alarms to go off, you probably shouldn't do that. But to use it as a flavoring and dressing or something like that. I like it. I think it's pretty good. You can also take the hemp grain and kind of crack it, toast it, and you can get these sort of shelled hemp seeds at your grocery store as well. And think of those as like, think of them as like sunflower seeds. You use them as like a seasoning on your salad or something like that. And I think they're pretty good as well. And then over here on the far right is fiber. And fiber is sort of the, I don't know, we've come a long ways in the fiber world. When people talk about hemp in the old days, people still talk about rope, using hemp for rope. And we're so far beyond rope. The fiber is really high quality fiber. If it's grown properly and processed properly, it can be used for clothing, textiles. It can be used in computer chips. It has a lot of uses. Building, construction, almost anything that you could use a tree for. Cut down a 20-year-old tree, pulp it up, and use that tree, you could use hemp fiber for as well. So it's got a lot of uses. Why grow industrial hemp? Well, right now everybody wants to grow for CBD. This was a report put out just last year saying 14% of Americans use it, and they use it for everything from anxiety, pain, help with sleep. Generally, those are the primary uses. So anxiety issues, pain, arthritis, sort of, and for helping with sleep. But of course, there's all those other uses, and there's a million different versions of this kind of picture up here with all the different uses for the hemp products. But primarily right now, if you talk to somebody about hemp, what they want to talk about is CBD. So what is our role? Well, we are KSRE, so we are research, extension, teaching. We are working on research to hopefully improve production. We're trying to do some variety selection, best management practices, and ultimately education for growers, for people interested in doing this, for the general public. I always like to point out that we just finished our first year. When we started down this path a year ago, I was accused on more than one occasion of sort of holding back data. People would ask me, so what's K-State been doing over the years? And I just kind of look at them confused, and we haven't done anything. But they were insistent that K-State had been doing research in industrial hemp for years, and we were just holding back data for whatever reason. So I like to remind people that we just completed our first year too. Nobody in the state should have more than 1 year's legal experience growing this. So we're all sort of in this boat together and learning at the same time. We are trying to distribute our efforts around the state. I'm down here in Wichita. Lucas Haig has got plots, fiber and grain plots out in Colby. Craig Roseboom and around me has planted plots in Manhattan last year, but they got flooded out twice. And my colleague Carrie Rivard in Olathe was working on CBD out there at his farm. So somebody walks into my office and says, I'm thinking about growing that hemp thing. The first question out of my mouth is grain and fiber or CBD, because they are completely different crops. With grain and fiber, you typically start with seed. You've got a blend of male and female plants. You're going to have pollen if you want seed, you have to have pollen. The fiber and grain varieties rarely go hot. It does happen occasionally, but not very often. And you're harvesting the grain, the seed head, the inflorescence, or the stem. It's a crop that's very familiar to a lot of Kansas farmers. If you are farming for CBD, you are starting with clones or feminized seed. You are looking for female plants only because you hate pollen. It will destroy your crop. The potential for CBD plants to go hot is a little more real. There's some issues that have to be dealt with as far as managing and harvesting, but they can go hot, which would be a crop loss. You're generally only harvesting female flowers, and it is a horticulture crop. So to see the grain and fiber in production, it looks very familiar to a lot of agronomy crops. To see the CBD crops in production, it looks very familiar to a horticulture operation. Here's the grain and fiber on the left and the CBD plants on the right. And one looks like a it could be a traditional agronomy field, and the other one looks like a nursery operation. So like I said, they look very different. They're grown different. Your priorities are different. Your maintenance is different, and it's very difficult for somebody to pull off both crops on the same acreage because of the pollen flow issue. Just a little bit about the plant. I've learned more about cannabis in the last year than I ever thought I would, but it's been fun going down this path. It is a wind pollinated summer annual, which is a big deal. Again, with green fiber, you've got pollen. With CBD, you hate pollen. And the reason for that is when those female flowers get pollinated, they stop producing the cannabinoids, and they start putting their carbohydrates into seed production. The cannabinoids that are for CBD are on trichomes on the female flowers, whereas the inside the grain, there's no CBD. So the minute those female flowers get pollinated, they immediately switch over to producing a seed and filling that with hemp oil versus CBD oil on the trichome. So the pollen issue is a big deal. The plant is usually dioecious, so you've got male or female plants. Occasionally you get some monoecious plants, but that's rare. And it is strongly photoperiod sensitive, meaning for the first half of the year, it is just growing vegetatively. It's just putting on lots of green matter, leaves, stem tissue. And then as soon as we get past that summer equinox, the days start getting a little bit shorter is the trigger that it goes to flower. And the plants will flower, the males will shed pollen and die. The female flowers will receive that pollen, and then once the seed are mature, then the female plant dies. So it's strongly photoperiod sensitive. It's just something you have to keep in the back of your mind. If you want to grow in the winter, like our greenhouse is full of plants right now, we've got lights. This place looks like Area 51 on a cold winter night. There's lights everywhere. A little bit about the grain and fiber. Planting at about 30 pounds per acre, about ½ inch deep. If you put it deeper than ½ inch, you will never see it again. The plant is a wimp. The seedlings, they can barely come through a crust. So it's got to be really, really shallow with the right amount of moisture for it to come up. You harvest when the seeds are about 75% mature. It does shatter. We haven't come that far in breeding yet. So if you wait for that entire inflorescence to ripen, you've lost all the seed on the lower half of that is just laying on the ground, and the birds are going to eat it. So when it's about 75% mature is when we go through and harvest. It can be done with a combine. Our research plots, of course, we just did by hand, but it can be done with a modified combine. And then storage, dry it down 8 to 10% for storage, and hopefully find a buyer. Fiber we plant twice as dense, 60 pounds per acre, but again, really shallow. We harvest when the male plants begin shedding pollen. That's about, because the male plants are going to just shed that pollen and die. So if you want the fiber from those plants, you need to harvest both male and female plants when the males start shedding their pollen. Can be done with a swather or a sickle bar. I had one fiber producer told us definitely not a swather, because the swather tends to gather the material into the middle. Whereas a sickle bar just lays it down, and you can use a hay rake to kind of turn it and let it mature. After it's cut, it has to ret for 2 to 3 weeks, and retting is a process by where the fibers separate a little bit. There's 2 different types of fiber in the stem, the bast and the herd fiber, and this retting process is basically a rotting process. The retting helps those fibers separate a little bit. So when it goes to the processor, it's a lot easier to process. You can separate those. Once you're down about 15%, you can bale it, and hopefully you've got a processor to go to. There's less margin on the fiber. There's more uses for the fiber, but there's less margin on it. And people with more experience than I say, if you've got to store it for months, if you've got to truck it from storage facility to storage facility or processor to processor, you lose all your profit right there. So you've got to get it cut, get it baled, and get it to a processor in a reasonable amount of time. So what we did this summer, we were fortunate to have grain, fiber, and CBD varieties. Talk a little bit about the grain and fiber first. We were doing variety trials for the first year. We had that's plan number 1 is which one of these varieties. We often would ask you'd ask a grower what variety they chose or how they chose the variety that they're growing, and the answer was often it was what I could find. So seed availability was an issue, and you can imagine if you got this variety because it was available, you were probably not as happy as the guy who got this variety. There were a ton of differences here. We'll look at some data in a little bit. Strong genotype by environment interaction. Colleagues, in New York and Kentucky say that varieties which perform well on one half of the state don't perform well on the other half of the state. So there's a huge genotype by environment interaction with this. So we planted ours about 1/2 inch deep, 100 pounds per acre nitrogen pre-plant. We went into a really nice weed-free soil, so we only had to kind of go through there and hand cultivate once for weeds. There are no labeled herbicides for this, so weeds are a huge issue for the grower. Irrigated as needed just to prevent drought. Last year we didn't need to, we were underwater most of the time. So. And again, you can just see the difference in those varieties. These were some of the Canadian varieties here that flowered. They got about 18 inches tall and flowered, which is not what you want. These varieties here, don't let that fool you. These 3 are the fiber varieties. So they were planted at twice the density as the grain varieties. So there's twice as many plants, twice as many seed went into that plot, which is part of the reason it looks so dense. But they are awfully darn vigorous. But you can just see the difference in these varieties across the plots. We harvested by hand, about 70 to 75% mature, dried down, and then cleaned them up by hand. Everything was done by hand. We're not, this is our first time doing a sort of quote unquote agronomic crop, so we don't have any of that nice fun equipment that some of the other facilities do. Look at the difference in the inflorescence. You can just imagine, that genetics makes a big difference. These are some of the Canadian varieties right here, Katani, CFX. And they just, CRS over here, they just got to about 18 inches tall, they flowered, set seed, and they were done. Keep your eye on Helena here. We like Helena. So just to look at a little bit of the data. This is plants per acre. And again, you can see the difference that genotype makes. So this is the number of plants that came up per acre. So it's sort of a measure of like seedling vigor, how viable were the seed. We put down as many viable seed. We had germination percentages, so we put down as many live seed for each of these varieties. But you can see the difference as far as what came up and what survived. And again, keep your eye on Helena. Not very good seedling establishment in the plot. But when we go to grain per acre, that inflorescence, that multi-branched inflorescence was just really, really impressive. Felina fedora are very common varieties. The CRS and the CFX are common grain varieties. They're used up in Canada, but we really, really like how Helena produced last year. We're hoping we can get our hands on some fresh seed this year. So it's the reason why these variety trials are so important. Compare our results to some of our colleagues around the country that have been doing similar work for more years. New York, Kentucky, Vermont. They're in their 5th year, where we're just in our 1st. And it's fun to sort of compare your results with how others are doing. And I think, this grain thing, it may have some legs here in Kansas. We did a really good job for our 1st year, just getting some experience with this. We had some really nice yields compared to what our colleagues around the country are doing. So I think there might be something to this grain, as long as we can find processors, people to buy it, and uses for the crop. Fiber, again, lots of uses for the fiber, everything from textiles to construction products. There's a big processor in Kentucky we visited, warehouse full of product, huge equipment. It is a mess. But again, looking at plants per acre, you can see this SS beta was pretty impressive. Good germination rates, rapid seedling vigor. We really liked SS's Sunstrand beta is their variety, so Sunstrand's beta was a pretty impressive plant. So with fiber, it's all about dry weight, how much dry matter you're getting per plant, and you can see that beta was over 5 ton per acre. Ag economists in Kentucky say that 5 ton per acre is the magic number where you can actually make a profit. So we were pretty happy to do that in our first year. We think a little more experience, we can probably get those numbers up a little bit too. Aletta did fairly well also for our first year. We're pretty happy with that. So we got a lot more to go with fiber, but the fiber and grain thing seemed to do pretty well for us in this part of the state. And then there's stem caliper. And you can see on that picture the two different types of fiber. The herd fiber is the white pulpy stuff. It has less uses and less value. Unfortunately, the majority of your stem is herd fiber. So in this case, having a larger stem isn't necessarily a better thing. So the fact that beta had a smaller diameter stem is actually a good thing. You get more bast fiber per acre than you do herd fiber with beta. So bigger isn't always better when it comes to fiber, hemp, and stem caliper. You will sometimes read how industrial hemp, you just plant it, you walk away from it, there's no pests, there's no diseases, it hardly needs water, you're just good to go. And that is all garbage. There are pests, significant pests associated with this plant. Spotted cucumber beetle was sort of superficial, but there were a lot of them. We had a ton of aphids. I've never seen aphids on a crop like I have seen aphids on this crop. The flip side of that is I've never seen as many ladybugs and ladybug larvae crop as we saw in this crop, but they just could not keep up with the aphids. We were harvesting by hand. And we left at by the time we left at the end of the day, we just had these little green and yellow aphids just crawling all over us. It was gross. But the aphids really, really like this plant. You know, the caterpillar larvae, they love it too. Hemp borer, Eurasian hemp borer is a nasty little pest which bores into the stem, which damages the fiber, and also for your CBD plants, it also likes to tunnel into the bud too. So that's awesome. Army worms were an issue. Russet mites in the greenhouse, we're dealing with those now. Botrytis disease, powdery mildew disease, primarily in the greenhouse. And yeah, aphids, if I didn't mention that already, we had aphids. And then there's some cultural management practices. The plant grows so darn fast, if you're making mistakes along the way, you pay for it later. So stem girdling roots can be an issue, was an issue for us as well. A little bit on CBD. This is what everybody wants to talk about. And you know, if you look it up, people will tell you that the CBD will cure anything and everything from, you know, sleep anxiety to male pattern baldness, anything in between. You will often, you just see these crazy outlandish things that people say this will do. And I try to focus in on this green area here. You'll also often see CBD or industrial hemp labeled as marijuana's non-psychoactive cousin. In some of the primary uses, people use CBD, and some of the areas where there is actually evidence that it works is in this little green area here. It's anxiety, ADHD, stress, bipolar, OCD, PTSD, depression. There is some real evidence to suggest that CBD works to help alleviate those. And I try to avoid using the term non-psychoactive because if it's affecting these conditions, it definitely has some psychoactive effects. So I prefer to refer to CBD as the non-intoxicating form of cannabis. So what about it? What about growing it? We're not supposed to use the M word, marijuana, but we do because we're grown-ups, we're big boys and girls. We can use that word. For optimal production, it is exactly the same as growing marijuana. If you had that college buddy that grew a good crop of weed, they can probably grow some good CBD as well. A marijuana operation and a CBD operation, they look exactly the same, they smell exactly the same. The only way to know the difference between the two is to have plants tested and see if it produces THC or not. That's the only difference. They look exactly the same. Most of our information for how to grow CBD plants comes from the marijuana, underground marijuana industry. That's kind of where we started. There's a lot we don't know. It's kind of fun to be on that front end of this research project where there's way more questions than there are answers. There's all sorts of opinions on planting, cultural methods, and fertilizing, how to harvest, how to to harvest, how to cure, how to store it. There's just, if you ask 100 hemp growers, you're going to get 100 different responses, and there's not a whole lot of data behind it. Most of it's just gut feeling. So there's a wide range of opportunities for research here. So for us, our operation, we started with rooted cut. For a CBD operation, you can start with rooted cuttings or feminized seed, because again, your goal is 100% female plants. No males, no pollen. We started with, we had rooted plugs rooted plugs here, that we then took to a 1 gallon container, let them size up, and then we moved them to a 7 gallon container to grow them out and to finish them. You can also move these plugs right to the field. We did that as well, and grew some fairly good plants that way. There's some steps along the way. We generally pinch out the top when they get to about 8 to 10 inches tall, because we don't want a Christmas tree. We don't want one tall tree with one big terminal cola on top. We want a multi-branch shrub, so we pinch it to get lots of strong multiple branches. We pull off these large interior leaves here because all they do is slow down airflow, and you end up with powdery mildew and other diseases. So pinching, thinning, and thinning we usually do about 2 to 3 times during the process. We had our best success probably in the high tunnels. We were looking at 7 different varieties we had. We're looking at high tunnel production. We had a greenhouse, and we were, of course, monitoring CBD and THC content. So we knew how much CBD we were producing and making sure we were legal. We were looking at organic versus conventional fertilizer. A lot of people who are purchasing CBD and using it, they want an organic product. So we're looking at organic versus conventional fertilizers. We're going to a typical plastic container versus fabric bags. Some of the growers really like fabric bags. Again, we're doing high tunnel versus outdoors. Just kind of the basics of some of our experiments. What we saw is a huge difference between fertilizers. Our organic fertilizer was a chicken manure-based fertilizer, and it just ran out. Put the same amount of nitrogen in versus our conventional fertilizer at the beginning of the year, and it just ran out. We just ended up with small yellow plants with real small buds and not much to harvest. The conventional fertilizer was a nursery fertilizer. It was a controlled release fertilizer, Osmocote. Plants were greener, larger, more buds. We'll take a peek at some data. We're also doing high tunnel versus outdoor. The high tunnel plants were beautiful. We had no problems there. They were large plants, many more buds per plant outside versus inside, or inside versus outside, and much higher CBD content because it was less pollination. Our high tunnel we had lined with insect netting to keep out insect pollinators, and it did a fair job of keeping out wind-borne pollen as well. Our outside plants were totally pollinated because we also had the fiber and grain varieties on station. So the outside plants were completely pollinated, whereas the high tunnel plants, very, very little pollination. So let's just take a look. This is, so if you're not familiar with cannabis terminology, don't be ashamed. You shouldn't be. They refer to this terminal bud here. I call it an inflorescence or a bud. This is what they call a cola. And that's what gets harvested, and these individual buds here get stripped off. So one of the things we did, we just count the number of colas on each plant with plants fertilized with Osmocote, our conventional fertilizer, or the organic chicken manure-based fertilizer, and then outside the high tunnel or inside the high tunnel. And you can just see the difference on the number of buds from outside to inside. Everything from 12 to 44, 0, because these all died, to 23. But take a look at one of our favorites here was the wife, from 11 colas outside to almost 70 inside per plant. So just a crazy increase in plant productivity in the high tunnel versus outside. So of course we had to answer the question, what about CBD and THC? So look at those same varieties. So this is again outside and inside the high tunnel, and CBD versus THC. You can see outside, they all got pollinated, so there's 0 THC, and CBD was really, really low. Inside the high tunnel, we had some nice CBD content, 14%, 11%, 15%. Those are really, really high. Anything above 10, you're doing really well. We did have one variety, ACDC, that came in at 0.4, and that is above the legal limit, so we got rid of that one. But otherwise, we were 0.3 and below, so we were right on. And then the conventional fertilizer was much better. You can see on this slide, so here's the conventional osmocote, these two plants, versus the organic chicken manure-based fertilizer was much smaller. And again, high tunnel plants, more buds, larger plants. You know, we're going to keep going, monitor for insect disease issues. We got lots of stuff to do. The door is wide open for us as far as what we want to do. We're going to look at water utilization, obviously a big issue in the state. Keep going with production practices. Looking at animal nutrition. There's some we've had some really promising data that some of the waste product of this production facility has really, really high protein content for cattle feed. So we're working on that. You know, we've been partnering with industry, which is great. We've struck up a partnership with the vet school, looking at feeding some of our CBD varieties to cattle and seeing what happens with that CBD, because currently CBD is not allowed to, hemp is not an approved food for cattle, and CBD is not allowed to enter into the human food stream. So we have to make sure that if you're feeding this stuff to your cattle, that it doesn't get into the human food system. We partner with the Department of Geology at KU, looking at water use issues. We've had conversations with the med school talking about doing some human trials. So there's just a lot going on, and I'm really excited to be doing this work right now. With that being said, I believe I am done, and I didn't want to keep everybody sitting in their chairs staring at Zoom for too long. So let me see if I can get things switched over and give control back to I think I got it.
Yep, I am the host now.
Excellent. So I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
We do have a small enough group that if you want to just unmute yourself and ask your question, that is completely acceptable at this time.
Hey, Jason, are you, is it going to be easier to get seed this year, you think?
I think it may actually be harder to get seed this year. And the reason I say that is the multi-state group that we're working with, we're having trouble getting our seed. The supplies, most of the supplies come out of Europe. And as you can imagine, shipments out of Europe right now are not going very well. So it may even be harder to get seed this year than last year. I'm not optimistic for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, like you said, it was pretty difficult getting it last year in a timely manner, correct?
Yeah, it was. We didn't get our seed. We planted the last week of June, which is insanely late. You know, we'd like to be planting by early May. Yeah, so hopefully there'll be some domestic seed producers in the near future, which will help this problem.
Brian Hale added into the chat, are the charts that you had in your PowerPoint available? Can you send me a PDF of your presentation, and then I can get it emailed out to people?
I can. All I did is copy and paste those charts out of those reports that you can get online though. So if you want to get those, you can get the PDFs from the new, if you search New Prairie Press hemp, our reports will come up. But yes, I can share that with you as well.
And if anybody would like a copy of his presentation through PDF, if you email me at B as in boy, OOR at ksu.edu, I would be happy to send that to you. I will also put that in the chat.
And you're right, we are a small group. I'd be interested to have anybody chime in and tell us their experience with hemp this year. If they had growers in their county or their area, and people that just, I'd be curious to hear what else is going on. Because of the rules and regulations, it's not like I can just, this isn't corn, wheat, or soybeans. I can't just drop in on a farmer and walk through their fields. I can't do that. That's not good with the rules. You got to be invited and be on licenses. And so I'd be curious if anybody else has any experience.
Does anybody have any experience they'd like to share? I do know that we have a couple of hemp growers in at least Barton County. The one that I know personally, I'm surprised she's not on here, but they have CBD oil and have just came into they have some creams and some oils that they're selling now. But that is the major one that I know around here. It's called South Bend Industrial Hemp. I don't know if you've heard of them or not. I think they've come to a couple of your programs.
Okay, good. One of the common questions I always get is, does it work? Does it work? Do you think it works with CBD? Does it work? And my answer has always been, I don't know. There's not enough data, peer-reviewed, scientific, medical data to say positively. But I guess all I can say to answer that question is I know enough people who swear by it, and I have some family members who swear by it, who are not crazy people, who are serious, level-headed people, and they swear by it as far as helping with sleep and helping with arthritis pain. So I think there's something there. We just need the research and the scientific data to follow along here.
I agree with that. My mother-in-law swears by it. She uses it for arthritis, and I guess I don't hurt. I'm either so used to the pain and joint pain that I have that I forget to put it on, or I don't hurt bad enough to make myself put it on. So I haven't tried it, but I know my mother-in-law and even my husband, he really likes it. And they both tell me that I am ridiculous for not using it. And I honestly just forget. It's easier to just pop my kneecaps back into place than it is go put on. I'm used to that. I'm not used to feeling pain-free.
And I always advise people to do their homework. Not all products are created equal. This is the slang word people like to refer to as gas station CBD. Look, pick up those bottles, look at them, look at the concentration. I've got a sample bottle here in my office that has, like 1%, and I know somebody who gets it shipped in from New York that's 10%. So there's
Wow.
Not all are created equal. So if you're thinking about it or advising, just make sure you do your homework first.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
We had growers that had crazy weed problems, and we had the aphids and we had the russet mites. Do you see pesticides getting labeled for use?
So great question. So as far as the weeds go, it's the same old story. It costs a company a fortune to add a crop to their label. So until this industry is large enough, I don't think you're going to see any companies adding things to the labels. In Canada, they are allowed to use Treflan for weed control. I think that's the only one. And Treflan's it's an old school pre-emergent, but I guess it's better than nothing. Regarding the other things, there are some crops, some organic products that you can use. For instance, for russet mites and aphids, we use pyganic and neem oil. There aren't any really complicated chemistries that you can use, but you can use, there are some organic crops that are acceptable. USDA just a couple months ago put out a list of 10 new pesticides that can be used on hemp, and they're all neem or pyrethrins or an oil. So there are some products that can be used.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
They're all in their post-lunch nap. It's a beautiful thing attending a meeting and having being able to turn your camera off.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That's one of the good and downfalls of Zoom meetings is you can turn off your screen and no one has to see you or no one gets to see you, one
That's right.
or the other.
Half of them have got dogs in their lap and kids over their shoulders.
Yep, I'm actually very surprised at this the hosting that my dog has not went nuts at the mailman or somebody walking down the street or something like that.
Well, okay.
With that, thank you very much, Jason. Once again, if you guys have any questions, you can get a hold of me at B as in boy, OOR at ksu.edu. And we will get your questions answered if you think of anything later. And thank you very much once again, Jason, for coming and doing this with us today.
Glad to do it. Thanks for inviting.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
See everybody later.